Hey, we're on. There we are. I can see us.
Jared was just asking about Matthew McConaughey's language.
His catchphrase. I couldn't remember what his thing was.
But then you got it.
Hey. It's not. It's all right.
Favorites. I feel like I'm definitely dressing down more and more every week.
I am not. I went straight from my like normal gray shirt to like hoodies all the time.
Like I wear like ripped jeans now and like old socks, and I mean, why wear nice clothes? It's
true. That's what I say. Like you are in a slow descent. I was just like, we're going from gray shirts.
You just went.
So we're just going to hoodies.
You didn't really have far to go. You just.
True. People wear.
Well, no, there is a step below gray hoodie.
What's that?
Isn't there? There's like shorts.
Oh, I don't do shorts.
Oh, no, you do though. Like I witnessed it. That's what I'm saying is like, it is one layer lower.
It's true.
In the rings.
I do have shorts. I just don't like to wear them in public. I only wear them in my house.
I know. I think that you've definitely like been at the church in your flip flops, thinking no one's
flip flops and cargo shorts. Cargo shorts are the worst. Dudes wearing cargo shorts. Ugh.
Jonathan wears cargo.
I know they're the worst. I wear them too. That's what I mean.
You do wear them.
I'm saying the only shorts I have, always have pockets on the sides. I'm like, what do I need all these pockets for? I've never put anything in the pockets of a cargo short.
You don't?
Never.
Well, then you end up with like lopsided shorts.
Yeah,
right?
you're walking like this, and you're like you're having to move your hands with your legs to steady all the weight. Right. It's the worst invention ever.
Swing a leg out.
Terrible. Cargo shorts are the worst. If anybody loves cargo shorts in the comments, you can put your comments down and let us know.
All
right. There we go.
Oh man, so it was my birthday yesterday.
It was your birthday. That's a big deal.
It's not.
It is a big deal. You're my age now.
I'm your age now. We're both 42.
True. 42.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm 42.
I like 42. I like my 40s quite a bit. I mean, we're just in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I loved my 30s. My 30s were great. Best decade of my life. It's true.
I liked, of the three, I did like 30s.
30s is your fourth decade, though.
Okay, fine. But like I'd lived, yeah, okay.
0 to 10?
Yeah.
Second best decade.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Then probably my teens.
Okay.
Then my 30s, and then maybe my 20s.
Yeah. 20s.
I didn't know what I was doing in my 20s.
Who does?
Yeah.
Maybe some of our listeners.
Marriage was hard in my 20s. Like if Rachel's watching this, she would know. 20s were tough. We got married too young.
So I got married way later.
Yeah, exactly. We got married in our early 20s. That's wise.
I mean, some of them do just fine.
Yeah, I mean, we did fine in the end. Not in our 20s though. So there you go. Look at Kevin Borst. Yeah. 42-year-olds are really getting into TikTok these days. We're thinking about it.
We're trying to understand it.
Trying to figure out what TikTok's all about.
I think a direct quote of myself today in our staff meeting was like, "But what's it for?" And I think the answer is like, it's fun. I'm
still trying to figure out Instagram though. So like, I mean, I used to know Instagram. I used to get it.
Yeah.
You post nice photos.
Yeah.
And then Instagram just changed a couple of years ago.
Stories are
everything. It's about stories and it's about ugly photos. Like
your face did something quite funny. Like,
yeah, but
I can't believe it.
I know, like bad design and it's a weird thing to me. So I post photos of my kids and my dog.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you don't want to see that, then nobody's forcing you at gunpoint to follow me on Instagram.
Do it.
Unfollow.
Unfollow.
All right.
Yeah. Well, 42 feels fine. I think I managed to have a really nice day.
Mm-hmm.
So
what'd you do?
I did some work in the morning, which I wasn't planning on doing, but I was like, just do some writing, Bobby. You'll feel better. So I did some work and then I went over to my aunt's. And we were going to hang out on the back deck. She has a really nice back deck.
Socially distanced.
Yeah, exactly. But it was so cold and rainy. It felt like Vancouver outside. So she set up these nice chairs in her garage. And we just kept it classy. Like hung out in the garage.
Kept it classy. A glass of wine in the garage.
We had Prosecco.
Prosecco in the garage. I like it. That was a good birthday.
It was nice. Yeah.
We have one of those heaters. Natural gas ones. So connects. We can disconnect our. What's the thing you cook on outside?
I could have come over to your house.
Why am I blanking on this word?
What? No,
you cook things on it, but it's in your backyard.
Your barbecue?
Barbecue. That's what I'm trying to say. You disconnect disconnect the natural gas from that, and you can connect the heater. So it's really nice. But I took it apart and I cleaned it so it would start properly, and then it got cold and rainy, so we haven't used it yet.
Right.
We're looking forward to that because, we're not going anywhere, so we'll be in our backyard, hanging out, looking at the stars.
Right.
I don't know.
Now that there's less pollution.
It's true.
You can just see
That's what they say. Okay, can we talk about pollution for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
I don't know if you read this. I read an article. They're saying total carbon footprint of the world has only dropped about 8%.
Okay.
Since the start of all this. So, and it's mainly because our actual personal footprint of carbon is such a tiny fraction of the amount of carbon our economy puts out, which is industrialized. And that really, even with sort of our travel being shut down, our personal footprint being shut down, it has not dramatically, it's dramatically cut down pollution, but not carbon.
The experience of our cities, especially LA.
But not carbon. And so what it shows is that we actually have to make better strides corporately in terms of our industrial infrastructure if we actually want to lower our carbon footprint. Now, that's not to say we should, be complacent in our personal choices.
Right.
I mean, that's a big part of why I live close to work. It's a big part of why, I eat the diet that I do. But if everybody made drastic personal changes, we would not lower our carbon footprint globally to what we need to.
This has been in the conversation.
It is, but I think sometimes there's still this personal pressure, which is good. I mean, we need to have that, but a real awareness of the fact that we need to change industries if we're gonna actually hit some of these targets that we think we want to hit.
Right. I think I've thought about it like, yes, it's important that I reduce, reuse, recycle, but it's really important about how I vote and like the politics I'm interested in, so that there's like much larger social change beyond like what I do with my city Jetta and my 500 square foot condo.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Cool. We were talking about something.
My birthday.
Yes, your birthday.
But I think it's interesting, actually, Jan. I thought about you because you do not love birthday attention.
Mm-mm.
You don't like it at all.
No, I keep it quiet. I keep it on the down low.
And like, why?
I don't know.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
You'd have a sure answer.
No, I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, because I love it. But like I kind of forget every year that I love it. Like I'm just like, it's fine. I end up feeling like it's just important that I find a way to celebrate my life in a way that I want.
Yeah,
I think maybe my single life really informed that, because I just was like, well, no one's going to plan a party for me, so I'm going to get good at planning my own parties. So that became a fun thing. But then every time like a birthday comes in, then you start getting all the messages and the texts and like the nieces and nephews calling. I love it. All right. I love it. And I think yesterday especially, maybe because of the time that we're in, I felt really like I sat with it at the end of the day. Like I let my brain, like my memory just kind of go through like the faces I talked to, the people I spent some time with. And it was like all these snapshots of like my little nephew's face, and like FaceTime, all of these moments. And it made me incredibly like grateful. I was like, I have a great life. Cool. And I felt really glad about it. But
Silver likes the birthday attention too.
That's me.
There's someone else in there.
Silver brought me cupcakes.
Oh yeah, that's right. I heard that. That's beautiful.
It was really beautiful. So great. So yeah, I think I was like, my encouragement to you, Jer, would be to find some room to like embrace it. Let the people love you.
So here's what I think it is.
For 43.
I don't like attention that I'm not driving myself.
Of.
Yeah, exactly. So I love attention, and I love being the center of attention.
Yeah.
When it's me driving it and asking for it and deserving, it's not the right word, but when I feel like I'm creating that attention.
Yeah.
I don't like attention on me when it feels just gratuitous or random or I don't know. And it just makes me really uncomfortable. Yeah. And so I have like...
I've seen you be uncomfortable with it before. I definitely have. Like, dude, just embrace it. Let the people love you.
Yeah. And the other thing is I find myself really awkward in small groups. So I like one-on-one interactions with people, and I like big groups of people. I don't like medium sizes. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether I should be bigger than normal.
Okay.
Like on a stage, or I don't know if I should be smaller. Right. And I get weird, and Rachel's like, everybody, you look mad at everyone. I'm really uncomfortable. In front of 1,000 people, right. I am like totally at home, and one-on-one having a coffee, I feel really comfortable. Right. Like 15 people, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Who is listening to me? Who's not? I don't know. It's very weird.
I've also seen that.
It's a very weird sort of personal affect, but
no, I get it. I think that I can relate in terms of like parties. Like I love a big group and I love like a smaller group, but like a house party can really stress me out. Yeah. So I get that.
So then when I'm at a house party, then I just like take over the room and I just make a big show. So everybody's looking at me, and then I'm okay.
Right.
But then like when they go back to their own conversations, I'm like, oh, what do I do? Like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to interact with people like a normal human being. I'm a clown. Everybody look at me. So
I just have all these scenes in my mind now of like these moments. You being like, okay, I'll just get big. I'll get big.
Or get really small and grumpy. Those are the options. If Rachel's listening right now, she's probably killing herself laughing because she knows exactly.
She knows. Mm-hmm. Okay, one last birthday note. Yeah. So for some reason, I've been, whatever, you get into like listening to music you love. So I was back into like a Bon Iver kick, and I freaking love Bon Iver. And I've loved like all of his albums and have really loved the latest stuff, like how weird it is and all the song titles. And then I saw on YouTube that there was an NPR Bon Iver show. So I was like, glass of wine in hand last night. I'm like, I'm watching this whole thing. It's my birthday. And I had such an interesting sensation of like, remember when we used to do this?
Oh, like
go
out
to shows and just be around people and sweat all over and like be around each other. But then I had this like also remembering Sundays and thinking about, remember when we used to be here in this space?
Yeah.
And it feels like standing on this stage in front of all these people was years ago.
It does feel like a long time ago.
Weird in terms of timeline.
Yeah. I mean, we're coming up on 8 weeks. But this is episode 8 of the after party.
Right.
That's 2 months.
We're telling time.
And
after party.
Yeah. Before BC, before COVID, and
I know. I thought you were gonna say before after party.
after COVID.
I know, it's true.
BCE.
But it's something about time is really it's such an elusive thing. Like it really does feel like it was more than 6 months. Like it feels like a year ago that we stood on this stage. Right. For me, that I stood on the stage and looked out and had like that live interaction in the room. Like it just feels much longer than
what do they say? 3 months to form new habits and neural pathways and stuff. I mean, we're 2/3 of the way there.
That's interesting.
To this being,
I didn't think about it
like our new normal with some of this stuff, which is, I mean, this is one of the long-term things when you think about all the social distancing is we're not going to be able to flip a switch and go back. Like just our neural pathways, what feels normal to us is going to, after disease. Yes. BC before COVID and AD after disease. That's so perfect.
Nice.
But it's going to take time for us to feel normal and comfortable again. And get back to those habits. And I think, as we were talking, I think last week about planning for the journal, I've been thinking about that is like, how do we start to teach ourselves how to, embrace touch and embrace community in new ways again.
Yeah.
Like some things, I think we're learning some skills now that are going to serve us well, and that's all going to be good. Right. Like I don't think handshakes are coming back.
Right.
Like we're just going to be doing fist bumps all the time.
Ugh,
so, so some things are going to change, but it's going to take some real work to go back to some of the habits that were good and healthy before COVID, BC. So.
Okay. True.
Any other birthday stuff? I was trying to think.
Oh no, I think I exhausted it.
I'm trying to remember if I had anything else.
Yeah, I was just curious about your hate of birthday attention.
So my story this week. I don't know if everybody saw my son's marble race. If you didn't, go to either my personal YouTube or my Facebook. We did marble races. So my son loves these YouTube videos and people race marbles. So we set them up and we had these jumps that they were going to do. And like we put 10 marbles in and they all go down. And the very last one like hits the ramp. And it like does a double doink off the rim and then lands.
Did you slow-mo it in real time?
So
you went back and slow-mo.
We slow-moed the whole thing.
Oh.
So that we could get it in case something cool happened.
Oh, that's so good.
And then we sped it all up for the whole thing and slowed down the last climactic moment. We didn't know it was going to land that way, but it was hilarious. But the best part is we start this video. My son wants to do this video of him because he wants to put it on YouTube, and he's like, "Hey guys, today we're doing the ultimate marble race."
He's also got a new dude.
He's got a new mohawk he's got that I gave him. So then he's like, "Leave a like on the video down below." So anyway, I post it. People are watching it every 30 minutes. He's like, "How many people have watched it now?" So it's like 800 people or something have watched it now, and every time he's like, he wants me to show him so he can see how many. And then when he hit like 500, he was like, "Dad, we're probably going to need to get some merch for people to buy." Because
he just thought of that on its own.
Because all these YouTubers he watches, they're always like trying to hawk their merch.
That could have kept him busy for hours, designing merch.
Yeah, it was great. So he thinks we need merch for his YouTube channel.
You 100%
If you want some Eaton merch, let us know.
Oh my God, I can just see like an outline of like cool
his face or something.
Face.
Yeah, there you go. So that's what we did.
Oh, that's good.
This week. All right, what happened this week?
So we went through part 3 of 4 of My Big Loud Mouth, all about oversharing.
It was about oversharing.
So what did you talk about?
You want me to overshare? Yeah, I mean, I think this has been kind of an interesting series. Mm-hmm. Starting with something like Everything Happens for a Reason.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, we started for a reason, which was it's sort of like this sideways way of coming into a conversation about things you wish you could take back.
Right.
Because normally we don't say that intentionally in a mean way. We don't wish we could take it back. But then realizing afterwards, when you push somebody through their pain too quickly and you rush them to that can be hurtful. Then we jump to the other side, which was I hate you. So Scott talked about that one. When we say something intentionally trying to hurt someone, mm-hmm. and then we flip back to something internally personal again, this idea of oversharing. So it's not that you were trying to be hurtful for somebody. It's not something that you could take back in the sense of like I was mean to you. It's just, mm-hmm. I wish I didn't tell that story to this person.
Right. And you did both. You were doing both the like when you do it and when it's done.
Yeah,
to you.
Too. Right. Yeah, exactly.
You did both of those experiences.
And that experience of just hearing that story come out of your mouth. And then immediately you're like, this is not the right place for it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's, like I said, the wrong person who doesn't treat your story with dignity.
Right.
Sometimes it's just like everybody's laughing, and then all of a sudden you're like, also my mom died, or whatever, and you just pour that out, and you just realize, like this wasn't the time, or these people weren't ready for it, and you kind of want to take that back. So we were talking about what happens. Where does that come from? Mm-hmm. What happens when you do that? And then how do we respond to each other when we're in those types of situations?
Right.
So that was the kind of frame for it.
That was
anyway.
The framework, yeah.
And then next week, we're talking about gossiping.
Oh, yeah.
So sharing someone else's story.
Right.
So it's sort of like that flip back to the other side. Okay. Again, maybe you didn't intentionally do it, although a lot of our gossip is. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I'm going to land on next week is that gossiping that's really designed to other someone. Like I'm telling you about this person and I'm trying to get you on my side against them.
Right.
So it's sort of that flip back to the sort of, maybe not intentionally, but that hurtful kind of conversation. And then there's the sort of awkward, I shared too much, or I said the wrong thing kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, how do you think when you said that kind of moment of knowing, like, I do you think people are often like very conscious of that? Like I sort of have these like different snippets in my mind of like, the story's coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, too late.
I need to get it back in.
And then you're trying to kind of land it, and like draw it back in, like that kind of feeling. I remember walking away from, or like being in those moments. I remember walking away from different conversations, probably in my 20s, and being like,
20s were the worst.
Yeah, or definitely. Well, actually, probably also in my 30s.
And also last week, but whatever.
But I remember like when I was really trying to date, and I would like have a couple drinks, and then I'd be in trouble because they'd ask a question and I'd be like, "Ooh," and then I'd be like, "No,
Yeah,
like get it back. You're probably never gonna see this person again. Like this story."
also, I love your language when you're like, when I was trying to date, like just the idea of like, I wasn't doing it.
No,
I was not dating. I was trying, but it wasn't it.
It was hard.
It was not it. I love that. I just love when you use that language.
That's funny. That's good that you picked up on that. But I just wonder, like, where's the point of awareness in our oversharing?
So definitely, and I talked a little bit about that space where you know that someone is oversharing.
Yeah, you feel it when you're stuck on the other side.
It's making you cringe, and you're just like, yeah, and it's not that you don't even care about this person. It's not even that you don't want to hear their story.
Yeah.
You just know this is not the moment for it.
Yeah.
And you feel that anxiety for them.
You're kind of embarrassed for them.
Yeah. That's a very real thing.
Yeah.
At the same time, and so I think some people do, and they're totally oblivious to it, and they're not aware of their oversharing. And I've met lots of those people. I've pastored a lot of those people before. And I think sort of very gently, you build that relationship with somebody, and then you're able to come alongside and in the right time, slowly be able to say to people, hey, like, this is not helpful for you to be putting all of this out there, and it's sort of, it's an ugly metaphor, but it's that idea of, like when you're wounded, you can bleed on people. Right. And it's like, you bring all of that wounding with you.
Yeah.
And if it's not dealt with, and if it's not honored in your own process, you end up getting a lot of that on other people.
Yes.
And at best, it's awkward and people are kind of cringy, and then they kind of back away.
Right.
At worst, I think it actually sort of damages the relationship, and it drives people farther away.
Yeah. When all you want is like closeness and to be heard and known.
Yeah. And this is
too much too soon. The relationship just like doesn't have the structure to hold all that you're sharing.
Right.
Which just collapses.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what I was trying to get to as the main point in the sermon, is this idea that when we don't spend real effort cultivating the kinds of relationships where we know we can be open and we know we can bring everything that's happening inside of us to it, and be completely vulnerable. If we don't do the work of creating those things, that need doesn't go away. And so it slowly builds up. And then eventually it's like the first person who's kind to us, it's like everything comes out.
Yeah.
Or we're at a party and there's people there, and all of a sudden we're trying to gather attention.
Yeah.
And we're not actually being vulnerable. We're just getting eyes on our story. And it's that idea that, and this has become really meaningful for me over the last 10 years, really, is that the way that I stop myself from oversharing is I am very diligent about making sure I have spaces where I can share, where I am vulnerable, and where I do have a spiritual practice of doing that. Because I know that I haven't done my 20s. Here we go. We're back to this. In my 20s, I did not
set up
do this,
the theme
right?
on purpose.
Yeah, like in my 20s, I was so, and this is not everyone in their 20s, but in my 20s, I was so desperate for people to know that I knew what I was doing, that I didn't want to be vulnerable. I didn't want anyone to see that. And then, because I still needed that, it would come out in weird ways. Wanting to be the center of attention, wanting people to know edgy things about me, all that kind of stuff. As I got older, as I got wiser, as I started pursuing a very small number of healthy relationships where I could be vulnerable, then it was like my need to overshare, like I could see it decline. Yeah. Because I had 4 people who knew my story. Right. And now I didn't need, everyone on a Sunday to know my story. Like I have a much better, professionally, I have a much better handle on what stories should be told from this stage to 1,000 people, and what stories, are really just for me. Right. And I talked about that in the sermon a little bit. Yeah. I think in my 20s, it was like, if it was a good story, it was going in a sermon. Oh yeah. Whether it was appropriate or not, sometimes.
I have to think about the like needs in context of that kind of sharing, in terms of like having like worked out my story, if it has some weight to it, in the appropriate places, so that when, say, I share part of it from this place, the stage, I don't actually need anything from these people. I've done that work already, because I think that is a part of my voice, is to kind of tell those
Totally.
kind of like personal stories.
Absolutely.
Because I really think like the personal in particular is universal. Like that's like I'm really committed to that idea in storytelling and in preaching. But I'm also, I think I've done a lot of that work to be like, ooh, if you haven't worked out this, don't put that story out there, in that place, because it's like icky. Mm-hmm. When people are doing that, like, oh, you need something from me that I can't give you. Yeah. And I'm not supposed to give you.
You're totally right, because it's not the story that determines whether it's appropriate for a sermon. I mean, you can tell incredibly vulnerable, hurtful, sad, painful, joyous, all kinds of stories. Yeah. But when you're preaching, and again, this is not a talk about preaching here, but you're telling that story to be helpful for the people, not to work out your own shit on stage.
Exactly.
And I think that's the difference, is there are stories that are just for me and they're just for Rachel right now. And in 10 years from now, in a year from now, they might be for everyone. Yeah. But I've learned the difference between those. Right. Now, what I haven't learned is what of my son's stories are appropriate for him. I tell too many of his stories. So as he gets older, I need to rein that back in a bit. But that's really it, is any of your stories can be for the people around you, especially the people you care about, especially the people that care about you. But they have to be stories that the right people have heard. They help you process. They help you work through. Yeah. And now maybe you're sharing your story out of a place of healing, out of a place of strength, out of a place of wanting to help someone. That can be really beautiful. Yeah. So it's not about some stories shouldn't be shared.
It's like you can give the gift of your story without needing something back from someone. I think like there's a generosity to that kind of story and that kind of sharing that's not like attached to like sort of like a deficit. Or
now again, and Ashley's commenting on this too, that thin line. I think it is a really thin line. Yeah. But remember, this conversation here about what stories do you share right in public and all that, that is, we're talking past that small group of people that you've invited into the most vulnerable parts of your story. Yeah. Because what I'm not saying with this is every story needs to be processed before you share it with anyone.
No.
Because you're never going to process them if you don't.
No, exactly.
It's just when you haven't processed it yet, that needs to be sort of a very small inner circle who've earned the right to be there with you. Right. So it's not that you don't tell your story until you've got it all worked out. It's that you keep it very contained.
That's lonely. That's a place of like shame.
Yeah.
And
that's not good. Yeah. It's that some stories need to be shared in a very small circle, a very trusted circle.
Yeah, the working out of how you piece together these bits of your story, like your
and then you can make decisions about where you share them. Yeah. Because that was really what I was trying to get at Sunday, is when we're oversharing, the thing is we're not making a choice about whether we're going to tell this story. Mm-hmm. It's that story bubbling up because it's had nowhere to go, like coming out.
Yes.
And we end up being at the mercy of that story rather than us choosing how and when we're going to process that story. And those are very different things.
Do you remember that show? You Can't Do That on Television.
I totally remember that. When they've dropped slime on people.
I know. I was just thinking about that green, icky slime. Like we end up sliming people, and we just long for somebody to receive our stories. Instead, we just slime them. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about your connection to oversharing and empathy. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. I just want to hear you talk about that a little bit more.
So what was my piece in there? Yeah. So empathy is around, for me, when I talk about empathy, what I'm talking about is this this skill of being able to join somebody in their story. Right. So sympathy is sort of this external, I see your story. Yeah. I acknowledge your story. I feel bad that you've been through this thing. Right. Empathy is this sort of, I am going to
I feel what you're feeling. That is the definition of empathy.
Yeah, but for me, I think there's more than that too, because it's actually I'm going to join you in that story. Okay. So I'm going to open a part of my story that's equally vulnerable. I'm going to show you that I'm with this in this with you. Okay. Not just sort of as a definition, yes, empathy is just the feeling of it. Yeah. But I think in terms of relational context, empathy is the ability to actually join somebody in their story, to sit with them in it, to experience it with them. And so what I was talking about on Sunday is empathy can be both the skill or the emotional intelligence, that empathy that helps you say, where is someone at in their story? How do I join with them in it? So how do I open myself? How do I share a bit of my story? Reciprocate with them, so that I can show them that I care about them, that I'm here with them, that I'm not trying to rush them, that I'm willing to go through this with them. So there's that level of empathy. But the flip side of it is, I think also empathy is then what helps us to judge where somebody is at emotionally. So it's like your emotional intelligence. So I can see your pain. My empathy can say, okay, I need to join this person in it. Here's how I'm going to show them I'm going to do that. Here's how I'm going to journey with them. Empathy can also be the same skill that has me looking at you and saying, this is what she's going through right now. This is the capacity she has or doesn't have. So how is it appropriate for me to now unload my story onto her, right? So you tell me a sad story. Okay, my empathy allows me to join you. I have a sad story. My empathy is what allows me to evaluate, are you actually in a place where you can receive this story, where you can reciprocate it back?
Yeah.
Right? And so we're all in this range of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens when we haven't worked on emotional intelligence, when we haven't worked on empathy, we're not a good judge of someone else's ability to empathize with us.
Okay.
And so we end up talking to the wrong people because we're like, oh, they seem like a nice person. I'm going to unload everything.
Right.
Well, empathy would come along and say, I'm picking up cues in this person that tell me they are not as open to me as I am to them, or they don't have the emotional capacity right now to bear this story.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
That type of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I was sort of getting at is,
right.
we talk about empathy in terms of how we join someone else, but empathy is also what allows us to decide who's ready to join us. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of, do you know about the work of against empathy?
Yep.
Yeah. So that Paul Bloom wrote this book, Against Empathy, about a case for rational compassion.
Yep.
And I often think about it. I've never read the book. So this is sometimes my problem is like, I know a little bit about a lot of things, but he argues that empathy is not like, it actually has a way of exhausting us, and it doesn't promote, better connection. So he argues for compassion, where you have this kind of distance from yourself and you're able to, hear and care about, but you don't sort of take on the emotion and the like deep feeling of that person. And I find it really interesting, like that. I think your definition of empathy is really quite broad, and maybe he's using a much more narrow, but he, cites research about empathy having this way of like exhausting people, making it really difficult, and actually making you withdraw. And so it was a study around different kinds of meditation. So they studied meditation of empathy, studied meditation of compassion, and found that people who were really in touch with compassion were able to like feel energized and could say like, I have some distance from you. I'm not exhausted by your story. So I actually have some energy to like do something about it.
So I have read his stuff, and I think sometimes what happens is it comes down to these questions of how we're using words. Yeah. Because compassion from Greek is or Latin actually is common suffering, right? Like passion is the suffering. Passion of the Christ is the suffering of the Christ. So compassion is common suffering. It's I join you in your suffering. I feel your suffering. I join you. So sometimes when I read these things, Brene Brown, really big on empathy. Her word she uses. Other people are like it's compassion. It's other people it's sympathy. Yeah. But then when you start to read into some of the nuance in the literature, what I find is everybody is sort of walking this line. Same thing like I was saying on Sunday. I used the word empathy, but at the same time I said, okay, so your empathy is going to let you join someone in their story. Your empathy is also going to give you the emotional intelligence to know that person's not ready for my story. Right. So yes, if empathy,
if I go there when I think about empathy.
Again, but this is what I mean is like, do you go there when you hear compassion? I guess it depends on how you are used to using that word.
I mean, it makes some sense to me, but
yeah. So, and I think this is what it is it's I think if we get down to it's this word or it's that word, we're always just going to be in a debate about, what's our semantics.
Right.
I think what we need to have is enough nuance in our conversation to say, yes, empathy that makes you feel the story of everyone you encounter is of course not going to be good for you.
Right.
That's going to be way too draining. It's going to be way too taxing. And you're not going to have spaces where then you can share your story back with someone.
Mm-hmm.
Same way, if you constantly are sharing the most vulnerable parts of your story with everyone that you meet,
mm-hmm.
that's not empathetic because you're not taking into account sort of the awareness of everyone.
Yeah.
So I did on Sunday move back and forth a little bit between empathy and emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the language that comes out better all around.
Yeah.
Is rather than compassion, because to me, I'm not sure compassion is a better word for all of this. I'm not sure sympathy is a better word for this.
Right.
I think it's all of these, it's like anything. You have intelligence, but your intelligence is the way that you speak. It's the way that you can do math. It's the way that you can solve problems. Like, when we do an IQ, which again is not a great measure all the time, there's no problems with an IQ test. But theoretically, what an IQ test is trying to solve for is your problem solving ability to take all of these different skills and layer them together. Emotional intelligence is that same kind of thing.
Right.
If my only skill is to feel the pain of everyone around me, if my only skill is sympathy to see your pain and toss some platitudes at you.
Right.
If my only skill is to share my story everywhere.
Right.
That's what I was saying is oversharing is not a good skill. At the same time, if you are not vulnerable and you don't share your story anyway, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
So it's always about having, like anything in life, it's always about finding these balances and sort of testing the water on either side.
Yeah.
So for myself, like I said, in my 20s, it was a lot of pull back into myself, try to appear competent. That was the most important thing to me. And then realizing that wasn't healthy. So then leaning into pushing myself to say, I'm going to be more vulnerable. I'm going to seek out those relationships and I'm going to consider it a discipline to invest in them and be present to them. But that's what keeps that group small. So then that I can do the kind of job that I do where I listen to people all the time.
Right.
And this is the other thing. You and I have the same job. We do this all the time. I can't take everybody's story with the same type of depth with me at the end of the day.
No.
That's not healthy. It's not good for me. So emotional intelligence is knowing, and even empathy for me is knowing how do I be present to that person in that moment, but understand what I'm doing for them, right? I'm not taking their loss. It's not mine. I can't feel it the same way that they do. But I can be empathetic in the sense of not just saying it's a terrible thing that happened to you, but saying, hey, here's in my life similar things. Here's what's happened. I open myself up. We share back and forth. I reassure them that I'm willing to go through this with them on the long haul. But at some level, I can still go home and I can still switch gears when I walk in to see my son and I pick him up and I play with him and I talk to Rachel.
Yeah.
I've been doing this job for 2 decades now. And Rachel knows that she doesn't want to know everything that happens at work.
Yeah.
She thought she did when we first got married. And now she realizes, she doesn't want that. I don't want that. I don't want to rehearse everything when I come home.
Yeah.
But again, how you use language, I don't know. But to me, that's empathetic to realize that also I'm not going to bring it all home for my wife. I'm going to understand what's healthy for me in that moment. So maybe the better word is emotional intelligence because it brings all of these things together.
I think it does a little bit because I was even just thinking about like even in some of my most intimate relationships, like having a healthy distance from the pain of somebody I love so deeply is it, like to kind of realize like that is like I'm here. If I can do anything, like let's think about that. But ultimately, like that, like I'll take care of me and like you'll have to take care of you a little bit. And like we'll kind of do some of that work of taking care of each other. But like if I just switch over to like I feel with you, like I'm just kind of like I don't know. It seems to be like a cycle of like, oh, you have need, and then I took on your need, and then like we're kind of like.
But isn't that
a cycle of?
I mean, that is very much what I was talking about on Sunday. Is if you don't have healthy boundaries,
I think I just got a little like with your language of empathy because it just seemed like quite elevated, and I was like, Yeah,
but see, this is what I'm saying. A lot of this like pushback on empathy. I'm like, I don't think they've read any of the literature on empathy. Like I have never read any of Brené Brown's stuff and come away with the impression that she wants you to feel the pain of everyone around you all the time and sink into their despair. despair. Like, it's just not what she's saying.
Yeah.
And it feels like everyone's arguing against a straw man a little bit.
Right.
Whereas the people who like the language of empathy are not arguing for that.
Yeah.
The people who are saying compassion are not saying you should keep yourself distanced in a way and never be present to somebody.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I think this is the problem when we have synonyms in English, is they all are going to have different nuances for us, you know, and that's where, again, whether the language is helpful or not, that's very much what I was trying to get to is you have, if empathy is your word, you have to think about it on both sides.
Yeah.
It's got to be the empathy of how you join someone.
Yeah.
So also got to be the empathy of how you evaluate someone. Is this the person to share with or not?
Yeah.
You know, which is what I think that whole passage of Jesus is about. You know, do not give to dogs what is sacred.
Yeah.
Your emotional intelligence will be the thing that'll help you decide. You know, I hate to use the language, but who's a dog and who is not worthy of your story?
Yeah, right.
You know,
right.
I mean, I'm not calling people dogs.
Right.
It's the metaphor he's using there.
What was the like understanding of like emotions in the first century? I mean, getting a little.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to do more research, but I mean, the Greeks. So this is where when Paul starts talking to the Epicureans and the Stoics and all these things, like you're talking about very different schools of thought around emotion in the Greco-Roman world. Now, in the Jewish world, I would argue that the tradition was much more in tune with the range of emotion. There were schools in the Greco-Roman world, like the Stoics, who are very much, the path to enlightenment is to realize that your emotions, your urges, these are the lowest expressions of what it means to be a being. And so the path to enlightenment is to get away from that. And I mean, that's very much, sort of that Buddhist, where Buddhist, comes from as well, is that place that, hey, listen, our emotions can drive us, like I talked about on Sunday, into all kinds of uncomfortable, unhealthy situations. So then is the response to say, okay, well, then we don't need emotions, then we don't need empathy.
Right.
Or is the response to say, yeah, emotions are a very powerful force in our lives.
Right.
So we need to be aware of them, we need to be in touch with them, and we need to understand when we're using them and when they're using us. Right? But the Stoics would have said, no, like you try to assiduously eliminate any strong emotion, any passion from your life. You don't feel fear, you don't feel joy, you tamp those things down and you become rational. That's how you become rational. David Hume would say the opposite, that there is no such thing as rational. There's only our experience of the world. I mean, that's much later, pre-enlightenment, but this whole idea that rationality is an expression of our experience of the world. It's not detached from that. And so our rationality is seen through our emotions. That's who we are at the core of our being, but it's always finding this balance between them. And then Scott talked about Jonathan Haidt 2 weeks ago.
We mentioned that last week.
So in Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, Righteous Mind, he talks about this idea. He uses the metaphor of the rider and the elephant to realize that, look, your rationality is the rider, your emotions, your gut feelings, these are the elephant. And that's the metaphor you need to keep in mind. It's not a horse and a rider. It's an elephant and a rider. And so there are times where a rider can see much farther ahead than the elephant, and the rider can direct the elephant and move it in different directions. But at the end of the day,
it's an elephant.
When the elephant wants to go where it wants to go, your rationality has, cannot change what you feel.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so he says, the more you're aware of that, then you can steer your emotions, you can shape emotions, you can see emotions coming. But there's no way to think that you can be a quote unquote rational being who's purely driven by that. And so we have to embrace this sort of sense of humanity that is always in touch with this precarious balance between these things. There's no such thing as a Stoic who's just a rational being who sets their emotions aside.
That's not human.
Yeah. Now, an Epicurean who just is like, hedonist, who's just like, I'm going to give in to my emotions. I mean, then obviously you're going to find yourself, I think, causing a lot of damage to yourself and a lot of damage to the people around you.
Right.
But it's that melding I talked about on Sunday. It's the melding that Jonathan Haidt is talking about in The Righteous Mind.
Right.
It's what David Hume is talking about when he's saying, hey, rationality is not as pure as the Enlightenment thinks it is. We are still feeling creatures at our base.
Right.
And so how do we bring these two things together?
Right.
And that to me does seem more in touch with what I read in Jewish literature. Jewish philosophy comes to us very differently than Greco-Roman philosophy. So it's not sort of laid out.
Right.
You read it in narrative.
Argument, right.
Yeah, but when you read Jewish narratives, like they have this playfulness. You read the Psalms, you get all these strong emotions coming through.
Yeah.
But a lot of the Psalms, what you'll read is this giving voice to the most outlandish emotions. Like, God, I want the babies of my enemies dashed on the rocks. Like I want, and then you'll find this coming back around to, but actually, you know what? I'm going to rest in the trust in the Lord, and I'm going to trust in the, you know what I mean? So, and to me, that's that kind of balance. It's like, hey, we can't pretend we don't have these things. We can't pretend that we're rational. So let's give voice to our emotions in the right space, in the right time.
And then we have some space to be rational.
Exactly. And let's have the community that comes around and brings us back to the core of the story. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you would classify that as Jewish philosophy or Hebrew philosophy, but it seems to be this much more integrated piece. And then you also have the Greeks sort of thinking about spirit and body in different ways, and the Jewish people not thinking in that dichotomy.
Right.
Like I'm not a body with a spirit inside of me. Like that's very foreign to Hebrew thought.
Yeah.
I'm me.
Right.
And I'm a spiritual being, but I'm an embodied spiritual being.
Right.
And so even that sense of like pain, like physical pain, is not separate from my emotions. It's not separate from my rationality. It's all part of who I am as a human being. I mean, I'm very drawn to that idea. But I mean, there's things we can learn from philosophy too. I'm not anti that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it would be interesting to talk about our relationship between oversharing and confession.
Yeah, that's cool. Talk about that.
Right. I don't know. I had some notes, but I don't know if they were things that I picked up on what you said. I grew up, my imagination around confession is obviously around like Catholic Church confession. Hang out. He's getting comfortable.
Yeah. I'm settling in. I want to hear this story.
All right. I don't have a story really. I mean, so confession would be outside of relationships that are, this inner circle of relationships like you talked about, where you share your story and kind of work it out with these close relationships. This would be the relationship you have with a priest. Essentially could be a stranger. You walk into a room or sit in a confession stall and like unload this thing and then, are absolved and walk away. But we still have language around confession in the scriptures outside of that tradition, which would be, you cited James.
I'm going to talk about it again on Sunday.
You are going back to it.
Yeah. It was sort of a little tease on Sunday, and then I had an idea that I wanted to do.
Okay. So you're come back to around confession or a different part of it?
Yeah, around confession, but not in the context you're talking about. But I am going to come back to it on Sunday.
So it's just kind of another arm of this conversation, right? That like, what's the role of like, of unloading your story on or with somebody that isn't in your inner circle, but maybe has a role to be able to.
So I want to hear what you think. I want to answer one question. Ashley's asking, do we ever consult mental health professionals when we write things like this? Absolutely. And we have a number of mental health professionals in our community. Like most of them are being interviewed this year this season on the Between Sundays podcast.
Yeah.
So check that out for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely we do. We did a series a couple of years ago called Death and All His Friends. And Joel Ruse helped us with that one. We tag team those sermons back and forth. And so whether it's mental health professionals here in the city or literature, absolutely, we're checking those things. And not just on emotional issues, on all kinds of things. We're trying to learn from those things.
Yeah, I think.
And also recognizing the difference between them. Because, so I'll make one more comment on that, and then I want to get to your confession thing. One of the things I recognize is that I'm not a mental health professional. So as a pastor, I've taken courses in counseling. It's not the same thing as my degree is in counseling. I study theology. I have 2 degrees, but they're both theology. They're not even pastoral degrees.
Yeah.
They are like academic theology degrees. So my training in terms of counseling people is very limited.
Yeah.
And so there is a thing that I do called pastoral counseling, and that's a valuable piece. It's not the same thing as professional counseling.
Exactly.
And so what we do at Commons is
Refer.
a lot of referrals.
I love referring.
Yeah. And not only referrals though, but if people come to us, if you need a referral, talk to us. We can subsidize, we can help, we can make sure you find the right person. We can make sure that you get access to a counselor if you can't afford that. Like there's lots of things that we can do, but that's all part of what we consider being pastors is to make sure you get the resources you can. And so there is something.
And not to pretend like we can do all of that.
Exactly.
Work. I think
so I help people think about their
damage.
spirituality.
Yeah.
I help people think about the theology of how they interact with God through these things. That plays a really important role alongside professional counseling.
Yes.
They're different streams, they play different roles, and they complement each other well for the right person.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. So a lot of the time I will refer somebody and then I'll continue to meet with them in a pastoral counseling setting while they meet with a professional to do something else. Now,
but I'm not going to do your family of origin work. I'm not going to do your
I mean, we can talk about those things.
Absolutely.
Because again, both of us have some training in that.
We witness all parts of those stories.
Exactly.
There's nothing that's off limits for our pastoral sort of witness and presence.
But it's not our role to do that. And we understand that very well. Now, to your point about confession, this relates because I do think, let me say this about counseling. I often tell people when they come to me and I refer to a counselor, what I say to them is, there can be something really freeing and really beautiful in continuing to walk with me and knowing that I will be here for you as long as you want me to be, for years. I will be in your life as long as you're part of Commons Church, and it doesn't matter what you tell me, I am telling you now, I'll journey with you. There's a freedom in knowing that.
Yeah.
You can tell me anything, we'll talk. There's also a freedom in going to a counselor who you know you will not see until you pay to meet with you again for another hour. Right? So there's a freedom that people have when they meet with me. They can tell me anything and they're going to see me on Sunday. There's another type of freedom in knowing you can go to a counselor, you can meet with them, and you will not see them again.
Yeah.
And both of those things can be really beautiful and really healing at the same time. Now back to your confession question. I think this is the thing that becomes really valuable for us is there's confession one to another. That's the James. So I'm going to talk about more about that on Sunday. I need people in my life that I can say, this is what I'm struggling with right now. This is how I messed up. This is a thing that I said to my wife that, I've apologized to her, but I need you to know this and I need you to sort of work with me on this so it doesn't happen again, these types of things. There's also something about the kind of confession where we name the thing so that somebody can speak on behalf of God and tell us the thing that we already believe.
Right.
And that's what confession is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't Protestants have these weird ideas about what goes on in the Catholic Church and in the Catholic tradition or the Eastern Orthodox tradition, this idea that you have to confess to a priest to be forgiven.
Right.
That's not exactly what's happening. And so I saw Protestants on Twitter dunking on Catholics when the Pope was like, hey, listen, because of COVID, you can confess directly to Jesus. You don't have to go to your priest. And they're like, see, like Martin Luther won or something like that. Well, no, the Catholic Catechism has never said that a priest can forgive you. The priest pronounces the forgiveness of God to you. And what's beautiful and what's insightful about that is this realization that, we believe in God. We believe that God forgives us. But until that's embodied in a person, in a community, in a voice with skin and bones that says back to us, you are forgiven, you are loved, that's always going to be hard to hold on to in some way.
Yeah.
And so we don't do confession here in the sense of some people come in and they close a door and they sit with me.
Yeah.
But regularly in sermons, I am saying, you are welcome at the table of Christ. You are forgiven. You are loved. Like that kind of language is not just, it's not just a quirk of our vocabulary that shows up so much.
Right.
It's because it fulfills the role of confession in our church. That when I bring up things that, and I do this all the time in a message, when I try to bring up those things where we reflect and we say, hey, this is where I've messed up or this is where I've done things. I will always try to follow that up with some verbal statement of acknowledging you are forgiven.
Right.
regardless of whether you've asked for it, regardless of what you think, regardless of who you've gone to or what prayer you've said.
Yeah, this
right
is our
now,
larger confession.
You are forgiven. You are loved. You are welcome. And again, it's not because I pronounce the forgiveness of God over anyone. It's because sometimes the forgiveness of God needs to be said out loud before people. And that's the really sacred thing that priests in the Catholic tradition, but I think in our rule as well, and I think something we've gotten away from
in the priesthood. Yeah,
exactly. We've gotten away from in the evangelical
I kind of have these like images in my mind of like how we end up with this posture in our lives of sort of like getting sort of stuck with our heads down. Maybe it's shame or the details of our own story that we sort of like get worried about or consumed over, and we forget like the banners that are over us, like that there are banners over us that God writes for us that are like, you are loved, you are forgiven, you are a child of God, you are made in the image of God. And I think the beauty of the work of the priesthood is to just like lift the head of the people, lift the heads of the people to say, look at the beautiful banners above your head. Like they're always there. I don't need to be but you might forget. So let me help you see.
The work of Christianity is helping people come to see the goodness and the grace of God.
Right.
We are not, no matter what it has become in evangelicalism, we are not bringing the forgiveness of God to people. We're not bringing the grace of God to people. Yeah. We are helping people to see the Spirit that is around them all the time. We're helping people to see that grace that is around them all the time. That's what salvation is. Yeah. Salvation is coming to see that you are saved. Yeah. It's not that you somehow, and we use this language all the time. We don't have to earn it. We don't. But then the way we talk about it is like we have to. We have to say this prayer. We have to raise our hand, or we have to come to the front. Like it's the same thing. Huh. But our job as the priesthood in that broad sense, or just the church, like, because we're Protestants. So we are all the priesthood.
Exactly.
And this is when we pray one to another and we confess one to another. We declare that forgiveness and that grace and that welcome back to each other. It's not just pastors.
Right.
But that's what we're doing, is we're helping people recognize the truth that surrounds them all the time. And this is where I think sometimes we have too deeply individualized our faith.
Yes.
Is we've given people the impression that if you just think these things, then you're forgiven.
Right.
And you are, because you were always forgiven. The problem is when you just think these things and you don't talk about it and you don't hear somebody say it back to you, it's hard for it to become real, because again, we are not just rational creatures, right? Because it goes back to that whole thing. We're not just rational. We don't just think our way through salvation. We just don't think our way through forgiveness. We experience it. We emote it. We feel it. We speak it to each other. We, all of those things. And so it has to be expressed. It has to be lived out, and it has to be reflected back to us. Not because it's not real if it's not. But because it is in the Catholic tradition at the best of moments. Now, are there people in Catholicism who misunderstand it? Of course there are. Are there priests who misunderstand it?
I mean, it would have been, I had confession as a part of catechism, and it just would have been so lovely if a priest would have said, like, you're a child of God, like you are loved. But I just remember him saying, what have you done? That's bad. And I was like, I guess I was mean to my brother. And he was like, go say 3 Hail Marys and do our fathers. My memory of that moment is quite lacking.
And how is it, it's the same.
It could have been so much of what I just
people who in our community who've come up in the evangelical tradition or the Eastern Orthodox, like there's always moments where we drop the ball, and I take that seriously. There's moments where we are dropping the ball all the time at Commons, and I mean, that cuts deep when I hear like people
walked out.
And I mean,
so
not that they
feel like
people walked out because they didn't like it, whatever. But when people walked out and they felt like they weren't welcome or they weren't loved or whatever, and that we didn't do a good job of that. I mean, I take that very seriously, because I mean, But
let's end with it's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock already. Okay.
Well.
Oh, also my battery's dying. Apparently, I didn't plug in my computer.
Ooh.
What do we got here?
Do you want to talk about one more thing?
Sure.
Or?
Let's do it.
Okay. This idea of like, those who deserve your story and that your story is sacred. Like that was some of your language. What were my questions? Like what role does that play in growing friendships? Like I just was thinking more about process rather than like sort of arrival in like, oh yes, I have these 5 friends. Like people are coming here or like drawn to our community to find friendships, real lasting, like meaningful community. And I think I was like curious about of exploring the process of the thing.
I'm going to try to plug this in before.
Okay.
Keep talking. I'm listening.
Yeah. I think I just asked the question. That you're, that, okay, I would believe that my story is sacred. Okay, I want to find like meaningful places where I can process my life and ask big questions, or even just thinking about the community that we encourage people towards, which are like groups, which is like meeting with a group of people that you don't know their history, how do you move towards like what is the process? What does like walking this out really look like?
I don't know that I have good advice in terms of what does the process look like. I do think you're very much correct. And it's a very important thing to name, is that we are always all in process, and all of our relationships are in process.
Yes, right. It's not a given that like these 5 friends are going to be the 5 friends.
Yes. So the 5, I don't have 5 friends, let's be honest, but I do have some friends, but they're not the same as they were 10 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's okay. Is giving space for that. And that can be hard too. There's a grieving process when that changes. Totally. Sometimes it's not even something that happened. I mean, I've moved across the country at one point in my life, and there was probably a year after moving to Calgary where I kept those relationships that I had, and I worked at it, and then I didn't.
Right.
And probably that next year they kind of faded, and then it was some point down the road that I realized, oh, I have let these things lapse.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. I'm still friendly with those people.
Yeah.
My friend who I held hands with at Canada's Wonderland.
That's right.
I talked to him, actually a couple months ago, but I talk to him every couple of years now. Everything's friendly, but it's different. And so I think this is an important piece that we always have to be investing in relationships and evaluating relationships.
Yeah.
So,
and there's something about holding them kind of loosely, which I think is really important. I think, again, back to that, like, I need too much from this, and then I have quite a grip on it. But I think too, like sometimes, especially in a community like this, you get all kinds of people, like it might really surprise you who ends up being like a really great friend in your community, and like how to kind of have an open posture towards like the difference, the beauty of difference, and building that.
So this is a whole other thing, but I do think the more I think we get into this habit where we assume that people aren't interesting. So, like we assume that there's nothing there. Like, I think if we had a little bit more imagination for what could be below the surface of people, I think we would find that they're
infinitely interesting.
And that there are a lot of really great friendships that are surrounding us right now, but we just haven't thought of that person that way. I mean, that's a really interesting thing. And I've thought about that a lot of times at different points in my life in terms of when I've needed friendships, and I've been like, hey, how do I get those friends? And then I'm realized like partly because of my career, like I'm surrounded by all these people. And yet in my mind, I'm just not imagining, that they're there or something. Like why, where does that come from? And why couldn't I be more creative in my thinking? So there's that. But then also that piece that you talked about around, so you've got these friends, that's good, that's beautiful, but you have to keep working at it. You have to keep investing in it. And it's,
and like keeping an open mind that other people could still like come and join you in your sacred story. Like it's not like, hey, done, it's fine, like that's over.
And I mean that's that piece around I called it a spiritual discipline or something. I use that language at some point, but around building those relationships, maintaining those relationships, working on those relationships, evaluating them, like has this person moved on? Are they in a different space now? I mean, one of the tough things is
like check-in.
When you're in your 20s or your 30s and you're single, and then close friend gets married, doesn't mean the relationship ends at all, but it changes. And there's like, okay, well, what's happening now? And so how do you work at that? And now you have to put different effort in to maintain that relationship. So all those things happen. So absolutely, relationships are never static.
Yes.
And the deeper they get, the less static they become.
Yeah.
Right. My friend who I held hands with at Cam's Wonderland, that relationship has been static for a decade.
Yeah.
And it's been fine.
Yeah.
Because it's so surfacey now.
Yeah.
Right. And it will maintain that forever. I could go a decade and I could move back to Ontario in my 50s and we could pick up where we are and have a conversation. But the deeper a relationship comes, the less static it is, and the more effort it is, and the more you have to invest in it. So when you talk about those who deserve your story, that's not just who deserves it, and now another in the inner circle for the rest of their life.
Right.
It's not an appointment to the Supreme Court here, where it's like, you get this till you die.
Although there are those friends that are surprisingly like that, do stay surprisingly close with distance and sort of closeness and I think I
agree, but I think not every relationship needs the same type of work. So it doesn't mean that you have to talk to them regularly, but there has to maintain a certain vulnerability. So there are people in my life who I don't talk to that regularly, but when we talk, it goes back to that, back to a depth. And then it can pick up from there. If you have a relationship that you see once a year and you talk to them about surfacey stuff for 10 years. You can't go right back in.
Right.
So it's this really delicate thing.
Yeah, delicate is a real word. Because I just keep thinking about the spaces between us in these pews. I know we're not meeting in this room, but the ways that we like move towards each other in community and in small groups, and like that interesting dance of like inching our way towards each other. With great care and measure, but also like believing I could meet something really important of my own story.
So I mean, I don't want to go too much longer here, but I mean, it is interesting. So when I think about our small group, who I didn't know any of the people that were in it, and now all of those people are deeply meaningful for me. So there is something about just saying, okay, like. These are the people that are around me.
I'm going to be open. And I'm going to be open to this.
I'm going to invest in it.
But maybe on the first time you didn't like share all the things.
Not at all. I think
like
took a year probably.
We don't have to think about that. That like take your time, but show up.
Yeah.
I think there might be something to that. Like in this conversation about oversharing, like watch yourself, but also be open. And like take your time, show up.
Yeah, like a small group is this really interesting thing where it's like, here's some random people. I know I need people around me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna invest. I'm gonna put the work into these relationships. I'm not gonna show up on day one and put it all there,
right?
Because these people got to earn the right.
It's in the context of like this is where this is supposed to go. It doesn't mean you just went there.
They still got to earn it.
They have to earn it.
But you go in with the imagination to say, I believe these people are worth it.
Yeah.
I believe they will earn it, and I believe I'm going to discover something incredible and beautiful about them. I just don't know what it is yet.
Right. And that's our plug for groups.
Yeah, there you go. So there's groups. So if you're not in a group, sign up for one. I'll speak to the camera right here. You can sign up for a group at commons.life. We have Zoom groups all across the city, and we're launching new Zoom groups across the country now. We have some Zoom groups that we're starting in other provinces that are connecting with us online. Head to commons.life. You can sign up there. How do you like that?
That was
great way to end it.
Yeah, great.
You're a pro. All right. I think we're done for tonight. We've talked for more than an hour. We went long tonight. So
all right.
Ashley's talking about doing friendship speed dating when we can meet again IRL. I love that idea. Socially distanced, like speed dating and moving around.
We'll have to include that in one of our phases of reopening.
Phases of reopening. Yes. Oh, man.
Okay. Carry on.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. So good to chat.
Thanks, everyone.